Welcome to the Elevate podcast. This series focuses on elevating and inspiring women and girls into or to remain in the tech sector from the classroom to the boardroom. I'm Kelly Kwarteng, founder and CEO of Helzac and host of the show. Thanks for joining us today on another episode of Elevate Women in Tech. We have a really special guest with us today, Lucy Wilson, Engineering Manager at ASOS, who will be sharing her lived experience as a neurodivergent woman working in tech. Lucy has worked in tech for 6 years, mostly in the retail sector. She comes from a non-technical background, having worked in a warehouse, then finance, dealing with custom and excise tax, project management, before a colleague suggested she applies for a role in tech as service delivery analyst. She did not climb the ladder as such, but travelled across a spider's web to get her role as engineering manager, where she supports engineers' wellbeing, goals and career development. Lucy is recently qualified as a professional coach, as she wants to use her coaching skills to help others, especially women in tech and people who are neurodivergent. Today, we will be discussing what it's like as a neurodivergent woman in tech, working in tech, following her diagnosis of dyslexia officially in university, and is currently waiting on a long waiting list for her diagnosis of autism and ADHD. Lucy, it's great to have you here today. Really excited to delve into this really important topic.
Me.
No worries. So to kick things off, and I pretty much do this with most of my guests, it would be great if you could share what sparked your interest to make that switch into tech, and also what led you to the role that you're in today.
Yeah, so tech kind of found me, if I'm honest. Like you said, a colleague asked me to apply for a role or suggested I apply for a role. I've always had a bit of an interest in tech, so most of my roles have had some kind of tech element, kind of doing process flows or testing systems, and implementing them as part of like the finance roles that I've had. So yeah, I just kind of fell into it, if I'm honest. But I do like the fact that there's a diverse amount of people in tech and a massive amount of flexibility. And my current role really enables me to support people, and I really like to do that. That's one of my kind of key strengths. And as part of my role, like you said, I've been able to do the coaching qualification, which is great. It helps me to be able to support my team to answer their own problems, find where their passions are, and be able to kind of improve the speed that they get to their goals.
Perfect. And it's quite interesting. A lot of people that I interview, women and also some men, I spoke to a man yesterday, most people find their way into tech. It wasn't their initial path. And I love the definition we gave at the start of that kind of spider's web into it. You know, it's not that straight direct line, which everyone always thinks their career needs to be, and it's okay to kind of move around a bit. It's great to hear that you've got your professional coaching qualification, and I know that that's something that you've been working on, and it's great to hear that you've recently qualified now. From a coaching perspective, and kind of the work that you're looking to do to support the community, do you have plans currently, or kind of where you're going to go with that now you're qualified?
Honestly, it's so fresh that no, I don't really know what I'm doing, but it is become very clear to me through that year-long process of getting qualified that it is something I really love and I'm so passionate about and that I want to do more with, and the way that it enables people to speed up a process of getting to a goal that they have been struggling with for months or years, to be able to kind of pinpoint down specific things and actionable points and have some kind of accountability within those sessions, has sped up the process of people being able to do public speaking or getting to near the point of promotion and things like that and ready for their next role. So I don't know what I'm going to do with it yet. I know that I want to kind of bring in the neurodiversity element, because that's a slightly different way of coaching. I want to stick to kind of what I know to start off with, which is women in tech and tech. So there's just lots of things going around in my mind, but no kind of concrete way forward yet.
Well, Do you know what? I think there's so much need for coaches to support people within the space, particularly women in tech. We know that that's a huge area from a confidence perspective, that career path kind of goal setting and everything else. So one thing for sure, once you are ready and you know what's going on, and for anyone listening in, we will definitely share information about Lucy on the episode, and we'll also share some stuff on Elevate Women in Tech when she's ready to go. And you are one of our cohort 1 mentors as well, so thank you very much. Someone's going to be a lucky deserving winner of your mentor coaching skills on that program, so really excited to have you involved in that as well. A topic I know that is important to you, and obviously what the episode is about, is how the workplace can truly support neurodiverse individuals to thrive in tech. So it would be great, before we dive into kind of the whole topic, if you could provide a bit of context for our audience who might not be aware as to what does neurodiversity actually mean.
Yeah, so I'm no doctor, but I can tell you my perspective on it. So neurodiversity is a word that kind of explains the unique way that people's brain works. It's an umbrella term and covers lots of different varieties of neurodiversity. So within that, there's autism, ADHD, dyslexia, and some people include conditions such as Tourette's and stammers. Some people like to keep them separate. There's also a big question mark over, is neurodiversity included in disabilities or is it separate? So there's still lots of things being kind of discussed, and that's great that people are talking about it. And everyone's brains develop in similar ways, and obviously no two brains function alike. But being neurodivergent means that your brain works slightly different to the average person, and it's when those differences become a problem in everyday life. So often people will say, I've got a trait of that, and everyone is slightly forgetful sometimes, but it's when it's really impacting your life every day and you can't find your car keys every day and you're always late because of it. That's when it becomes more of a problem to people's life, and that's when it can be classed as neurodivergent. Another word to describe is neurotypical, which describes an individual with a typical neurological development or function. So it's generally, the world is set up to suit neurotypical people, and it's easier for them to work in everyday life, to survive in everyday life, other conditions aside, obviously.
Okay. And I think, thank you for your definition and your kind of explanation. It definitely helps me to understand this a lot more, and hopefully for anyone listening in, it will give a bit more of an idea as to kind of what we're going to talk about in terms of the topic on the whole today. And I think one of the things you mentioned there was the fact that people are talking about the topic more, and I think the more we talk about any kind of areas where people are at a disadvantage or they're part of a marginalised group, it raises that profile and it helps that community of people to thrive and achieve, which is what ultimately is what we want to get, which is where we want to get to. If we was to look at neuroinclusion then, so we talk a lot about inclusive workplaces. So why do you think neuroinclusion is key for companies to be aware of, to ensure that their neurodiverse individuals really do thrive in the workplace?
Yeah, I think it's really important that it is considered potentially even before you're aware of somebody with a neurodiversity joining a company or within the company, because then you've got the opportunity to be able to be on the forefront of something and be able to start considering it before they come in. I think it's really important that you're having those considerations and train. It has been seen as a stigma in the past. It's been seen as, ADHD is hyperactive, you're running around, you've got lots of energy, which isn't necessarily the case. It could be hyperactive in the mind. So if you're trying to hide yourself and make yourself kind of fit in, you're taking up so much of your energy to try and do that. You can't be as productive as you might want to be, or you could be if you could set yourself free and be able to just act how you want to act without trying to fit in. So it's really important that you're able to be yourself at work. I've spent many times sat in a meeting thinking, oh, I'm fitting in, I'm looking at people in the eye, I'm like got my hands still, I'm doing really well, and then I'm not even paying attention to what's going on because I'm celebrating the fact that I look like everyone else in the room. And then I've got no idea what's going on, and someone asks me if I'm meant to do something, I'm like, oh no, I completely phased out. So it's about kind of being able to accept people and meet people where they're at as well. So often neurodiverse people can come up with some really abstract ideas, some really creative ideas, and also sometimes need clear processes as well. So there's a lot of benefits to doing this as a business, and there's simple things that can be done to start that process. And I'm never going to be 100% for every person that walks in the door, but I think you could say that about neurotypical people as well as neurodivergent people.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And I think that piece that you said, it's like when we talk about women in tech and we talk about inclusion for women in the tech workplace, it needs to happen before the woman gets there. And it's exactly the same for neurodiverse candidates or potential people joining the industry or any workplace. It should be something that's thought about, that it's conscious. So then those individuals feel like they're welcome and they can be their true selves, like you said, like your example there of being in that meeting. Yes, you're killing it in terms of you're thinking that you fit in with everyone that's sitting around the table. And then, like you said, the question comes and you're just like, oh no, I actually need to do my job. So we don't want to stifle those individuals. We don't want to stifle that productivity. It's, welcoming people for truly who they are, which I couldn't agree with you more. I'd love to discuss your experience because you mentioned about ADHD, and I know you're waiting your official diagnosis, which I know can take a very long time. But how, if at all, has ADHD impacted your daily life and kind of your kind of work life? I suppose would be a great one to understand.
Yeah, so I think, well, obviously, like I mentioned in meetings, that can be fun in the past, but so I spend a lot of my time fidgeting. So I've got a fidget toy here now. Tried to be a quiet one, so I didn't get it on the recording. But I spend time fidgeting or doodling, and again, that can often be perceived as I'm not paying attention when actually it really helps me to bring my attention into something. So I've had interviews in the past where I've come in with pen and paper so that I can doodle during the interview, and I've had to be quite honest about that. But at the same time, I need a company to accept me for who I am. So if I'm not me during the interview process, they're probably not going to like me during my career. So trying to be my authentic self through the whole kind of process is something that's important to me. Getting distracted, I am a whirlwind like in the kitchen, so I have to have kind of like multiple alarms to not forget that I've put something in the microwave, or what time I need to put stuff in, and I'm like writing down if I've got a roast, what time I need to put the chicken in, what time I need to put the potatoes in. Otherwise I will completely forget what's going on. And it's similar in work life. I have to kind of put schedules, meetings with myself in my diary so that I don't forget to do that action that I said I was going to do. And I've got it on a to-do list on a piece of paper, and I've got it on a to-do list on my screen. So kind of multiple places to keep reminding me to do stuff. At the same time, if I'm interested in something, I will like really hyperfixate, and I'll spend a lot of time doing it, and I'll do it to a kind of fully focused, forget about the world, forget to drink, forget to eat, which is where the alarms and stuff come in. So yeah, time blindness can be a problem. And again, for me, I have kind of gone the other way. So you can often get time blindness where people are late all the time. I'm super aware that I am time blind. So I have alarms to make sure that I'm early. And if I'm planning to go somewhere, I will over egg how much time it's going to take me to get somewhere. So train's going to take an hour, it might get delayed, so I'll do an hour and 20 minutes, and I've got 10 minutes to walk to the station, or I might as well add an extra 10 minutes. And by the time you've added it all together, I'm probably like 30 minutes early to something that I really didn't need to be. But I'm so panicked about being late. It's kind of the opposite end of it, whereas you'll get other people that are kind of always late all the time. So there's a real kind of diversity of the way it can impact lives. I get really overwhelmed. Overwhelm is a big thing, and it drains my battery like super quick. So if I'm in the office or in a busy environment, lights, noise, touch, having to kind of deal with lots of different people, reading body language, that can become quite an overwhelming experience. So just kind of being conscious of how that impacts me. Yeah, and I think because of the way I've always tried to mimic people in the past, trying to do it less so now, I am quite a chameleon, which I think is how I've been able to change jobs and stuff. So I can blend into lots of different groups. When I was in school, I had lots of different friendship groups that I kind of ducked in and out of. And if you think about like the kind of preppy girls to the goths as it was back then, I kind of was able to somehow manage to get into a bit of all of them. And I think that's just from being able to kind of copy people's body language. But then when it comes into the workplace, that's been really helpful, because if I'm talking to people more senior, I've got a really good way of being able to kind of see the language they're using, mimic it, and play that back. And also, if I'm talking to my direct reports, like what technical language are they using? I'll find out more about that and mimic that kind of information back. And that's me being interested. That's just not me trying to copy what they're doing and fit in. It's a way of me showing my interest as well. So yeah, there's like swings and roundabouts as to positives and challenges. But overall, I think it's made me the person I am. So I'm super happy about that.
Yeah, I was going to say there's some huge positives there, and I'm sure, like you said, that overwhelming feeling must be exhausting at times as well, where it's just like, oh, like how do I move on to the next task or whatever it is that I need to do next, because it's just drained me. Obviously, when we talk about kind of individuals that have neurodivergent challenges, I don't know if that's the right phrase to use, but there's obviously some myths that can be surrounded around different diagnoses that people have. And obviously, for you having ADHD, what are the myths that you would like to dispel around ADHD from your lived experience?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest one is the hyperactivity. So they're starting to look at like the different ways that ADHD presents, and obviously more women are now getting diagnosed, which is great. And it was often seen before that the hyperactivity was physical, you're running around, and that isn't always true. And people can look at you and go, well, you're not running around in circles, you can't have ADHD. But for me, it's a constant a million things going through my mind. It's the having multiple tabs open. It's the having every drawer open in my kitchen and walking into them all the time because I've kind of forgot to close them, or I forgot what I was doing. So it's not just physical hyperactivity, it's hyperactivity in the mind, which can be a massive misconception, I think. And the actual words for ADHD don't necessarily match the diagnosis now. So, but I don't think we're going to get away from that. And I think the other thing is ADHD is just for children, for kids. It's being diagnosed a lot more in adults, and it's no longer kind of the naughty child diagnosis as it was previously considered. And I think COVID, as much as that's had a massive impact on the world, for this has probably had a change in people's perspectives, because people were sat at home with potentially only themselves and their family and a lot of time on their hands, and starting to realise that the things that they were potentially running around doing all the time to cover up some of this stuff, they couldn't do anymore. And scrolling through social media and starting to see things, and then obviously it takes you down that rabbit hole. More adults are getting diagnosed since kind of COVID and since it's being talked about. And then I guess that brings to the next point of ADHD is over-diagnosed. So there has been an increase in diagnosis, but that is because of a number of factors. And there are more people talking about it, and there is more research going into it and more understanding of different types of ADHD and acceptance of it. So people are going to be more willing to come forwards. So I think they're probably the big ones for me that are definitely getting there and people are understanding. And I'm sure more myths will come through soon, but yeah.
I think that myth of ADHD is just the naughty child. It's definitely one that, if you asked me, that's kind of one of the first kind of conceptions that would come into my kind of thought process. But you're right. I think the fact that we are talking about this more, I think the diagnosis of that, and actually, I know a number of people that have been late diagnosed, and actually, if you look back earlier in their lives, they're now understanding why they face certain challenges that they did along the way because of the diagnosis that they're starting to get now, and it's helping put a lot of kind of context on things. And I think it's that saying of "don't judge a book," I think is such a key. From an ADHD perspective, what coping strategies or tools have you found? You spoke about a couple of them already, that has helped you manage your ADHD symptoms.
I think the biggest one is to not compare myself to other people. I think the thing that I've done across the years is seen that someone has one to-do list and they're super organized and they manage everything, and I need to be that way. And now starting to kind of unpick that and realize, like I said before, I need multiple platforms to hold my to-do list. Sometimes I will do it on one place, then I'll get bored of it, and I will just, without really realizing it, I've gone from having it online to having it on a piece of paper with sticky notes everywhere. And I'm like, okay, fine, my brain switched this week, we're doing it this way. And instead of me punishing myself, being like, oh, why can't I use that one thing that I just said I was going to do? It's like, fine, scratch that, we'll come back to that another time, and we'll use these sticky notes that we've got hanging around everywhere this week, and we'll see what happens next week. And if that changes tomorrow, that's completely fine. So I think it's understanding how you kind of work and not punishing yourself for that is a really big thing to start understanding. Things that are boring are really hard to do. So gamification is a massive thing. So going for a walk is good for my mental health, but it is not the most fun thing all of the time. So sometimes I'll go out for a walk and I am pretending I am a giant, and I am climbing over mountains and jumping over big puddles, and I'm just literally stepping over a puddle. I'm jumping over a lake in my mind. So it's that kind of gamification. And a great one that I saw online the other week was tidying your kitchen. I keep going back to cooking, but it's mundane. So tidying your kitchen and pretending you're a spy and you can't leave any evidence whatsoever of your existence. And I thought, that's great. I love that. I'm a spy every evening if I can't clean my kitchen.
Kitchen spot.
I wouldn't say that. And then time boxing is also really important, as I said before. So forgetting to do something that you might have mentioned, so putting that in your diary. I've recently kind of restructured all my diary to consider when I'm most productive for doing focus work and when I'm most productive for having my one-to-ones with people. So one-to-ones in the afternoon and focus work in the morning, and then trying to time box those mornings. So putting in an hour and a half to do X, being conscious that I know it will take me 20 minutes to get into a subject, that's fine. But making sure I've got a reasonable amount of time to do that thing. And then body doubling, one that I haven't really been able to do, but I know works quite well with other people. So for that, it's around having somebody with you. And it's not even from an accountability factor. It could just be literally someone else sat in your living room whilst you're tidying up, and work-wise being sat on a call with someone else, not talking, not doing anything, but you're on a call, they're on a call, and you're both working. And for some reason makes you, or can make you, be able to focus a bit better. It's that kind of subconscious accountability. And you can discuss what you're doing at the end. And I think a lot of developers do that naturally with kind of paired programming and stuff like that. So one to keep trying out, but we'll see. And then as I mentioned before, hyperfocus. So hyperfocus survival is a big thing. So if you've gone down that rabbit hole, I try to make sure each morning, again, not always fully good at it, but that I've got a snack on my desk and that I've got a drink of water on my desk. Because if I've gone down that rabbit hole, if I don't see those things directly in front of me, I'm going to forget to drink, and I'm going to forget to have lunch, and I'm going to forget to walk away from my desk. So again, seeing them doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to drink it, but at least I've tried to put something in place to help myself. And when I kind of come out of that, I'm going to drink the whole glass of water and need probably a few others, but it's trying to kind of protect myself in the first instance.
Cool. Lots of tips and tricks that anyone listening in, they might be able to take on board, or maybe if you're working with someone who has ADHD, you might see some of these traits and then you might be able to understand more, be more kind of that inclusion piece is definitely something that awareness definitely would help. Shifting gears just slightly, what advice would you give to somebody who has recently been diagnosed with ADHD as to how it might be able to support them, I don't know, in the workplace, just in life in general?
Yeah, so obviously I haven't been diagnosed, so I'm still on that waiting list. And I think there's potentially a misunderstanding, especially within kind of the media and stuff, is that people get diagnosed super quickly. You'll see like documentaries online where a celebrity is like, oh, I think I've got ADHD, and then they get a diagnosis within 6 weeks, and then they go through the understanding period. And that's not the reality that I have seen in any way. So a lot of it is as you're kind of going through that diagnosis waiting, often people are going through and looking and trying to understand what they're kind of talking about. So I'd just be very conscious of where you're getting information from, and to start considering like where that's from. Is it a reasonable, reputable source? And starting to understand the things that you can celebrate. So in my mind, if I've gone to take the bin out, forget to put the bin bag back in, and probably have left about 6 things in my wake as well, I'm come back to that situation and I celebrate it, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I left the bin in the middle of the room. That's my ADHD. Great. Like I'm pleased that this is me and this is how I show up, and I'm not like, oh, beating myself up for that anymore. So I think it's to kind of really celebrate who you are. And there is a bit of a grieving process as you go through diagnosis of, I'm not that person that I thought I was going to be, and I'm not the way that I thought things were going to show up, and I didn't think it was going to be this hard. So there's definitely kind of a grieving process and lots of like wow moments as you realize, okay, that's the reason I do this. This is why I can't kind of function in this 1, 2, 3, 4 process. I'm like 1, 4, 2, maybe 3 will turn up at some point. You've kind of got to really come to terms with that, and that can be hard. So it's finding your community, talking to people, trying to find people that are going through similar processes, who've been through that. And as you kind of start to realize that these things, like I said before, are ADHD or anything else, you realize how much you've kind of masked, which is putting a mask on, hiding yourself from others, trying to fit in, and those kind of things start to really break down. So now, like, I wiggle more, I stand up more in meetings, I fidget, and all of those things I would have hidden before. And it kind of starts to feel like I'm becoming more ADHD when actually I'm just becoming my true self. So there's kind of a piece around that acceptance again, and helping others to understand. But you don't have to tell anyone if you don't want to. There's a lot of great people doing advocacy and sharing stuff, and you could potentially, drop some of these learning things into team meetings or whatever it might be with other kind of diversity things, so you're not potentially like outing yourself if you don't want to, having a bit more of a full DE&I lens and putting it in there so that people can learn about all sorts of different things without having to kind of put yourself out there if that doesn't feel safe or secure. But definitely it's the be kind to yourself. It's not an easy process to go through. For me, it's 30 odd years of learning and the way that my processes that I internally thought of how things work, trying to unpick them. So just trying to be kind of kind to yourself and try to start that acceptance process. It's not easy, but you've 30 years to build what you've got to. Could take you 30 years to unpick it, unfortunately.
Yeah, like you said, it's that being kind. It's a journey, isn't it? You know, like you've been on a journey of 30 years and now you're probably going to be going on even more of a journey. I think like with everything, it's that finding those people that can support you, that community that really makes you feel good about yourself, because it is you, isn't it? And I think it's being comfortable with who you are and not feeling like you have to be something different. So hopefully that's some advice there and some tips that might help people. And I'm sure, you know, if anyone wanted to reach out to you, you would be open to connections on LinkedIn and open to conversations and things like that. From your experience then as an employee and a tech leader, if we think about things from a workplace perspective, how can workplaces be more supportive of employees with neurodiverse needs? And what changes would you really like to see if you could kind of wave a magic wand and kind of have it implemented everywhere?
If I could wave a magic wand, I would have all sorts of kind of like external metrics that people could see as to my energy levels and all sorts of things, but I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But I think like companies need to be definitely more proactive than reactive. So if you think about kind of like physical disabilities, and it's no direct comparison, but often places will have a ramp, or at least a ramp available if you needed to get in with a wheelchair or a pushchair or something like that. And companies need to think in the same way for neurodiversity as well. So having policies in place or consideration within your policies for how these things might work for neurodiverse people is really something to consider. There's kind of people get burnt out and tired and drained a lot quicker, especially if they are masking. So they might need additional sick, similar to if you had kind of a physical disability and had a stomach complaint and you needed to kind of be off a fair amount of time. So those kind of things need to be kind of considered. And the other thing is that it's not up to neurodivergent people to train leaders about the disabilities or about their neurodiversity. Companies need to put that training into place and encourage, if not mandate, don't really like the word, but people to do it, because what is the important part is people's stories. So people want to be sharing their personal experience, how that affects them at work, without having to spend 6 weeks before that of one-to-ones explaining what is ADHD, how does it work, yes, it is real, like I'm not just being lazy this week, I'm really tired. So I think it's that piece about training. And within tech, I think we're really fortunate that we have, or most places have, a schedule that is flexible. Different sectors may not have that flexibility. Yeah. So it's the real consideration. And again, going back to the policy part of what environments and what flexibility will work for neurodivergent people. And having systems in place in the background, having communities in place to help people. So you might be really struggling one day. Can I pop a message in a chat and say, look, can someone just jump on a call with me to do some body doubling, without having to explain what body doubling is? And that's there. And I think a big thing as well is having clear priorities within teams so that you understand what you're doing, why you're showing up, and how you can really support that. I think the big thing to say is, though, that with many things, having these things in place don't just benefit neurodiverse people, they benefit neurotypical people as well. So having agendas on meetings really helps neurodiverse people, but it also really helps neurotypical people, because everyone needs to know whether they need to show up to that meeting, whether they're going to add value, whether that clash, which one's the most important. And if I've just got two random names for calls, I don't know which one's the most important, and I probably imagine a neurotypical person wouldn't either. So there are things that don't just help neurodiverse people, they make the whole work environment better for everyone. So I think it's really important to be proactive because it helps everyone.
Yeah, love that. There's some really great tips in there for employers, hiring managers, exec leadership teams, HR that are listening in, what they can be doing, just to kind of key takeouts and really kind of small changes that people can make to make the workplace better for neurodivergent people, but also better for the more efficient workplaces. Like you mentioned there, agendas on invites, such a basic thing, but how many invites do we receive? I know back when I was in the corporate world, and you'd get invites to things and you'd be like, what are we actually doing? And then like an hour before you go in, you might get a bit of an agenda that comes in, or you turn up to the meeting and the agenda comes up and it's like, why am I here? Like, why do I need to be here for this? So yeah, no, I completely agree there on some of the things that you've mentioned. If we was to look at employers from a hiring perspective, because obviously you mentioned some of the challenges earlier in the episode. If you're an employer, if you're a company that haven't been proactive and you haven't got any kind of considerations in place, and then you're looking to hire candidates in, and you might have is neurodivergent, what strategies or initiatives have you found useful for, first of all, I suppose, attracting neurodiverse candidates, and then that whole kind of walkthrough from job advert through to the interview process itself, to make it a more effective, more inclusive environment for those individuals coming in?
Yeah, I think you have to have those basics, like I said, within the company beforehand, and being forthcoming with them. So showing your policies externally are really helpful when considering which company you might want to apply for. I think I don't have all the answers. I think obviously there is definitely a stigma in the past around putting that you will have ADHD or autism or dyslexia on an application or on asking for a reasonable adjustment. But what I would say is, if you want to work better, you kind of have to bring that forwards and really check for yourself whether that company is accepting of that, because otherwise you're going to put yourself in a situation where you'll end up burnt out because you're trying to mask and hide and all these things. So if you are neurodivergent and you feel comfortable to, I would encourage you to do it so that you can kind of interview them as well on what they're doing. From a company perspective, yeah, I think considering your bias at the point of the hiring process. So when you're writing a job description, considering, and there are so many things out there as to technologies that can help us with this, of considering your bias, putting that out. Is it a job that is speaking to neurotypical people and not really considering any kind of flexibility in that? Which points are your key points that you can't change from that kind of neurodiversity lens, and which points are you more flexible on? I think being forthcoming with the policies, like I said, sharing those with the outside world, and starting to, if you do have neurodivergent people in your company, or at least a different diverse panel on an interview board, because if I come into a company and see that you've got a diverse panel of people, I can see that you're starting to accept a change. There aren't many companies that are 100% there. I'm not sure if anyone is right now. So having the start of something is probably like enough. And being able to reach out to people before they've got the interview and ask them what they need. So if it comes to extra time, sharing the questions before the interview, like from my perspective, an interview is not there as a memory test, so encouraging people to bring their notes to the interview and things like that. So, and I really struggle to keep on track, so within this today you've shared the questions beforehand, so I can keep referring back to them in my mind, so I know that I'm on track. And people need to do that as part of that interview process as well. If I can't see the questions, the likelihood is I've gone off over there and you need me over here. So kind of really sharing what that interview is, what's the format of that interview beforehand, and having a bit of that flexibility within scheduling. Like if the person needs to take a break, if you're becoming overly stressed, those kind of points of consideration is that shouldn't be seen as a negative, that person couldn't withstand an hour and a half of being questioned. It's just, okay, it's getting a bit too much for you right now. Do you want to just take 5 minutes? That's perfectly fine. We're cool with that. If it was a workshop, you wouldn't mind if someone walked out for 5 minutes to grab a cup of tea, like treating an interview in the same way. And it's often kind of seen as there's like these little things that we need to check that are there during an interview. So face to face, like, are they looking at the camera? Are they looking at me in the face? Are they kind of looking around the room? And within the UK especially, it's a really big thing that people keep eye contact. They shake your hand if it's a face-to-face interview. And those things, I am so uncomfortable. It gives me such an ick as to trying to do those things. And I don't understand where that structure's come from and what benefit that gives to the other person. So it's kind of considering, are we doing this because we're told we have to do it? Are we doing this because it's a social norm? What benefit does it give me if you look me in the eye, or if you're slightly looking away a little bit? Like, what difference does that really make to the process? Sometimes I will do a whole kind of chat and I'll be looking in a different direction because it's just helping me to retain or recall the information. So I think like we just have to be really considerate of why we're doing something. In other cultures, too much eye contact is seen as a big sign of disrespect. So like really considering why we're doing it, what we're doing. And I think being like really kind of forthcoming in that process of what are the expectations, really simple stuff of how long is the interview going to take, how many steps are there in the interview process, is there a dress code, are we expecting you to have your camera on, is it expected to be face to face, like being overly forthcoming with all of the information, so there is like less points of ambiguity that would then cause stress if you are overthinking something, which is again often a problem if you have an ADHD brain that thinks about everything altogether at a million miles an hour.
And I think that there's so many things in there that you've given such great tips and advice on. It's interesting, obviously, kind of companies and employers and hirers are being more aware. And only this week I saw, I can't remember, it was on LinkedIn, but it was someone who was interviewing for a leadership role. And one of the things he shared was the fact that exactly what you said, the interview isn't there to catch somebody out, and how he shared all of the questions he was going to ask prior to the interview with all of his candidates so they could be prepared and come. And actually, be it if you're a neurodivergent candidate or you're a neurotypical, having that information, I know what I'm like when I go for an interview. I get really nervous. So actually, I start to forget, I ramble, I go off on tangents and don't actually answer the question that I'm meant to answer. Whereas if I can go into something knowing the question, a few bullet points, it just helps you keep on track to keep things going, because it isn't a challenge. It's not something where, oh God, Kelly doesn't remember this, because actually if he was in the workplace, you could probably Google it, you could bring something up, you could ask somebody sitting next to you. It's treating people like humans. We're not robots and we're not supposed to know everything all of the time. So I really like that. And there's some really great tips there for people that are hiring that could just have way more effective hiring practices just by doing a few small tweaks.
I was going to say, also as like a candidate as well, like, so from a candidate perspective, I have, and I've unfortunately lost it because that is the way my brain works. I had a notebook with lots of different sections as to different things that would come up within an interview, and I would make notes of them throughout my career, so that if I ever got into a situation where I needed to go for an interview, I can't remember what I did last week, let alone 6 years ago. And I know it might not be fully relevant, but if you're changing careers, something from 6 years ago might be really relevant for a job you're going for now. So I tend to, I've kept that notebook so that each time I go through an interview process, I can remember everything I did. And I'm like, oh, wow, I really did that. Oh, yeah, that's great. I forgot about that. So, yeah, that's kind of probably a tip I would say.
I think that's a really great tip. We spoke about the hiring practice and how we can be more inclusive around that side of the process. So that's great. We can hire better. We can bring people in and attract more neurodiverse candidates from improving our hiring practice. But then it's a bit like women in tech. Like, we do all this effort to bring women in at the recruitment stage, and then it's like, right, well, what's next? Well, you've got them in your workplace. It needs to be a continuation. So once we've hired someone who may be neurodivergent, what onboarding practices, from your kind of experience, could enable neurodiverse individuals to thrive and really feel welcomed when they're joining an organisation?
Yeah, I think having a plan for your first day before you start, because you can't see your diary, and often I would check the day before what's going on tomorrow. So having that plan before people start, so they can roughly see what's going to go on within their first day, I think is really important. And if you can, like first week or so, so that you get to see that. A plan of the building, if you're having to go into the office, how facilities work. A lot of companies have gone away from a kettle and to these app things that are really hard to work out which button you're meant to press, and then I get stressed. I can't have a cup of tea. And so yeah, just kind of simple things like that of how does your printers work? How does your hot tap work? If I don't need it, I don't need it. And if I do, great, it's there, and I'm not having to kind of overly stress about these things. Really setting expectations with people. So often you'll come in and it's like, sometimes you might get a 30-day plan, sometimes you might not. Like, does your manager have any goals and expectations for you? Are you meant to hit the ground running on this project, or is it a slow get to know the team, what's going on? And those kind of regular check-ins with manager or whoever it might be. If you've got other people within the company with those needs, like setting up a community, having buddies when you start, having those, again, the policies in place so that you can like share them with people. And I think, like, if you can, having a conversation with the manager and HR, if you've got a HR, before somebody starts, again, proactive, not reactive. Like, what do you need to make yourself comfortable within this company when you start? Like, do you need to work from home 4 days a week? Do you need to come into the office? Do you need this? Like, having those really open and honest conversations before you start is going to make that person feel like, yeah, this is a place I want to be at. They're really supporting me. They're meeting me where I need them to be. But also from a kind of neurodiversity perspective, sometimes I don't know what I need, which is really hard. So I don't know the answer to that one, but hopefully someone in HR might, as to like, where do you go to get the information? If you're not a specialist in something, where do you go to find that information to offer suggestions as someone in this area? Because, you know, I can tell you what some of my problems are, but I can't necessarily tell you how I can answer that or what you have available. So it's just kind of starting that really open and honest conversation of, I struggle with time management. Have you got anything that helps within your company? Dyslexia, I read slow, or I use read aloud. Do you have those functionalities? What else can you offer? So it's really kind of starting pre them walking in the door. Like, you've offered them the role, let's start having a conversation about what we can do to really support you.
Yeah, and really understanding that person coming in. And again, really good onboarding practices, this should be a norm anyway. And I know some organisations are fantastic at it. Some organisations that you think would be fantastic at it, given the size and who they are, you're just like, wow, is that really how it happens here? So yeah, there's so many in-betweens. And I think if everyone could be more proactive, like you said, and less reactive, I think it's a better onboarding experience for all. We spoke about hiring, we spoke about onboarding. Next really important thing is retaining people. So, you could do all of these great things. You've onboarded them, they've had a great 1 week plan, and then kind of things just stop. So if we were looking from a retention perspective, we know that retaining staff, hiring is an expensive process. Losing members of staff is even a more expensive process for organisations. So what advice do you have for managers in supporting and retaining neurodiverse team members?
For me, it's about really listening to people. So when you're listening, not listening with your own assumptions and biases, like really taking in the information from what they're saying. I'm struggling with this, and not just going, well, have you tried X app? Like really listening to what their problems are and then potentially taking them away, finding the best person to answer those questions. And it's not putting it all back on the neurodiverse person to come up with the answers as well. Like, it's tiring being me. So I can't come up with everything for you. Like, there's got to be a bit of give and take in that situation. So making sure that you're really listening to the person, what they're talking about, where their strengths are as well is really important. So if my strength is, empathy, dealing with people, being able to kind of read them and help and support them, like, help me to go towards a role that is to my strength. Admittedly, I do find people really tiring, so it's catch-22, but I enjoy it. And again, it's the including people in policies. So if you've got neurodiverse people and they want to, including them in the amending of policies, or getting special policies put into place, or getting specialists in to help you with those things. So a great analogy that I heard at a talk a while ago was you wouldn't ask someone who doesn't know how to drive to teach you how to drive. The same way, don't make assumptions of my needs without asking me what my needs are. And yes, we could have a variety of different needs across 5 different neurodivergent people, but generally there's, again, some umbrellas that we can kind of put things into and start to help and support. Encouraging people to share their stories if they feel comfortable with it, putting that kind of learning and development of leaders in place, so training, so that people can then just share their stories. Regular check-ins is super important. So it could be a check-in one week about work-wise, and then a check-in the next week about how things are going for you personally, how anything we can do to help from a neurodiversity perspective. And once you've got that in place, maybe they drop off, maybe they don't, but at least you've set that boundary or set that kind of expectation, of we can have these conversations, that's fine. And I think for me, I couldn't tell whether it's autism, ADHD, or anything else. It's about really setting those expectations. So ambiguity is hard. So if you tell me end of day, get something done by end of day, one, I'll hold you to it. I think you expect it by end of day. I will email it to you at 5 o'clock, and I kind of expect some kind of response as well, because that's the way my kind of brain works. But often people say end of day, and it's kind of said in a really, some point around end of day. I take that as gospel. You take that as a bit of, in the next 3 days. And I am stressing because my expectation is different to yours. So if you're setting an expectation with someone, making sure it's not ambiguous, let's pop in a chat, is really hard. Like, what are you trying to get at here? Like, what are we talking about? Like, let's talk about this project. Have you got 5 minutes? That's a different conversation. That stops me stressing. I can find time in my diary for that. So yeah, those kind of things I think are kind of really important. And considering language as well is a really important thing when you're supporting someone. So what's the best way to support them? Do they just need to vent? Do they want to be helped? Do they want to be heard? Do they want to be hugged? Probably not so much for your managers, but like, where do you need me to be in these conversations? So, and again, I go back to communities as well. That's super important. You need to find your people, you need to find your tribe to really help and support you. So that and everything I've said above, which is a big ask and a long list, but we'll get there in the end.
Definitely. But I think, the more we talk, the more we raise these points, the more we start to change. And I think, from listening to some of the things that you mentioned there, all we're asking for is leaders to be leaders. And I think it's a throwback to managers, to leaders, to kind of really look at themselves as well and think about, right, how are you developing yourself to support your employees and your workers. So again, some really great tips and some really great bits and pieces that you've shared with us there. We're coming towards the end now. So in terms of kind of wrapping up our conversation today, what would you most want managers and leaders to understand about creating an inclusive culture for neurodiverse individuals?
Yeah, I think like what you said there, leaders is really important. So it's not just for managers. Everyone, in my opinion, is a leader in a company, depending on if you're leading a project, if you're leading people. So everybody really needs to have like this understanding, this basic knowledge. And I think, again, being proactive, not reactive, really think about what you're doing and making sure that you're putting those things in place. Hiring diverse people. So we don't want cookie cutters in a company. You probably won't get anywhere. You want to have a bit of give and take. You want to have a bit of kind of cross collaboration, different ideas coming up, and it creates some really amazing things. There's obviously things that we've seen in the past where you've got everybody in your team is right-handed and then nothing is developed for left-handed people. We want a diverse amount of people so that we can kind of come up with different things, new things, amazing things. And I think being really cautious of stereotypes. So don't just take things at face value. Don't just take things at what you've been taught at school or what's kind of come up in your past. Educate yourself is a really important thing. And just it's not that simple, but get the basics in place. So you're treating everyone where they need to be met. So neurodiverse, neurotypical, anything is, you need to treat the person where they need to be met. So being flexible, listening to their stories, advocate for them, really listen would be my kind of key things to do as leader.
We're at the end now. So finally, thank you so much for coming on. I've learned a load today. There's definitely things that have piqued my interest, and I know there's stuff that I'm going to go away and research and look into more. So thank you so much, Lucy, for sharing insights and kind of your lived experience as well, because obviously this is something that you have lived with for 30 years and you're continuing to work through and kind of help, and obviously you're going to be coaching others in the not too distant future as well. My final question, always throw a final question out there to the people that I have on. What advice do you have for women in tech who also identify as neurodiverse?
So I'm here with you. So if you want to reach out, if you need to have a chat, reach out on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to kind of chat about these things. Embrace your individuality, celebrate it, because we are so different in every single different way, and that doesn't just mean like internally, it's externally, it's everything. So if you've kind of done something that is a little bit different to what you were expecting, celebrate it, give yourself a little bit of an internal whoop whoop. You forgot to close the kitchen cupboards. Yeah, that's me. I'm all right with that. I'm good with that. It's no big problem. We'll close it again and we'll move on. And instead of beating yourself up about it, each of these things make you. Don't be afraid to ask for support, because those stigmas are breaking down and you need to be in an environment that works for you. And that can be hard. So, sometimes taking a temperature check of who is the best person to go to ask for this support. It might not be your manager, it might not be your colleague. Do you need to, go a few steps sideways to find the right person to support you through this process? But always ask for the support that you need and recognize your strengths, because if we learn to accept and love our strengths and what we love doing, you'll find that you can kind of mold a career that works around those strengths as well. If you're fighting against it, you're just kind of making itself harder. You're running uphill, and you need to be really accepting those things. And it's not an easy process. It's hard. It's sometimes draining in itself to go through that process. But if you really start to understand your values, what you enjoy doing, for anyone really, and starting to accept those and moving towards those changes, and the small things that you could do at work, like getting involved in a project that's slightly outside your remit, or starting to advocate for these things in team meetings, and starting to kind of get rid of that old baggage. They're things that you can really like then build up on and go towards what you really want to do. We spend so much time working, so we need to be in the right place, doing the right thing, and making sure that we're enjoying it, however many hours a week that we have to do it for. So yeah, I think if any of this has kind of resonated and you want to chat, then yeah, like I said, please reach out on LinkedIn, because I'm happy to talk about this stuff all day and every day, because it's my passion.
Awesome. Well, Lucy, really appreciate you coming on today. Like I said, sharing those experiences. I'm sure you're going to get quite a few reach outs from people that are going to listen into the show. And for any listeners, I'll share all Lucy's details in the show notes. You can connect with her obviously on LinkedIn, and we can go from there. So thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been great talking.
No worries. And to all our listeners, thanks again for tuning in to another episode of Elevate Women in Tech. Don't forget to subscribe for more insightful conversations with trailblazers in the tech industry. And don't forget to also join our LinkedIn and Slack community channels as well. Until next time, speak to you soon. Bye-bye.